Hi, I'm Matt, and in this episode, I'll be taking you through the wiring for the V1 flight control board. Now, just for absolute clarity, so that you know which board we're talking about, we are talking about the Omnibus F4 V1 board. So this is the board without the current sensor, and also this is the board which I would suggest for you to get started with. And the reason for that is that it's the easiest one to wire up. So let's see what we've got in store. Now, what I've been and done, and let me just make this point for you, because I want to make this series on setting up iNav as easy as possible for you. Now, the reason why I'm saying easy as possible, because on the Banggood page, if I scroll down on here, and it also, this is printed, and again, I'll be using the screen rather than trying to show you on the board, because the board, which is sat here on my desk and it won't come off, is absolutely tiny. And me trying to give you a walk around on that board with video is not going to work out very well. So we're going to be using much bigger pictures so it's easier to understand for you. Now, my only gripe about this board is that what they've been and done is printed the connections, or what the pins are, on the bottom of the board. And that means that when you turn the board over, because you've got the pin headers on the top, it's really hard trying to work out what's going on. So to help you, what I've been and done is created this image here, which is the wiring, the pinout, and I'll also be discussing the wiring with you in this episode as well. Now, I've got the full version of this image. There's a link to that in the video description, and of course there's a link to the flight control board as well to help you too. So let's take a look at the flight controller board. Now, obviously the difference between the picture on the screen and the one which I've got here is that I've got some pins already soldered on this one, and that's why I like this one, because you can just mash the pins on the top. With the V2 board, you have to do some separate wiring on the side, and you've also got to put your main pack voltage on there as well, which is a little bit daunting. So with that said, I need to grab wherever it is. Photoshop. I've got Photoshop here. I'll be drawing on the screen with you in just a moment. Now, let me just make the point. I'm going to put this image on the screen for you, and you'll be able to see the wiring for the GPS module. It's really straightforward. So in a later episode, I'll show you how to solder up the GPS with these connectors on. And this is why I like the V1 board, because you've just got to mash your two plugs on top of the board, and then you get your GPS working. Now, the only way which you can screw up as far as the V1 board goes is the powering of the board and the GPS module is that if you get red and black the wrong way round, then it's going to turn into magic pixie smoke. That's why we're going to spend some extra attention just pointing out where you plug those two in. And the TX and the RX, which goes off to the GPS unit, it doesn't matter if you get in the wrong way round, because it just won't work, you know? So let's get that off the screen. Right. Let's get ourselves familiar with the board. Now, these little boards, they're 35 or 36 millimeters square. We've got the little mounting holes either side. What I've got here, I've got a little 3D printed stand. Let me just put that up on the screen for you. So there you go, a little 3D printed stand, which I'm going to mount mine on. Really straightforward to do, and just a couple of little M3 little plastic nylon lock nuts. Little nuts or screws to go in on the top just to hold it still, and that also makes it mounting easier in the model as well, because I can glue this into the model, and then if I ever need to take the board out or to get access to the USB, for example, I can just undo those screws and remove it. Now, if you don't have a 3D printer, then I've got a little balsa, little platform which I've made there using the little nylon standoffs. Again, same principle. So anyway, let's take a look at the board. Now I need to go and get my colouring pen out, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw on the screen for you. Now, where do we start? Let's start with the obvious, actually, which is the right-hand side of the board. So you'll see that we've got this block of pins here on the right-hand side. And there's one set of pins which are most important to you, which are these top 3 pins here. And the reason why they're important to you is because that's where you connect your either S-Bus or CPPM. Now, it's worth pointing out, this outside rail there, which I've just been... In fact, why don't I use some colours? I'll tell you what, we use some colours. Give me a moment. Let's go and choose black. This outside rail, so I'm going to do that with black, okay? So the line onto the outside edge of the board is ground, okay? The next row which we have in the middle is positive, or 5 volts, okay? And this out of this inner row is where we have all the signal pins, so those going down there and also there, okay? Let me get that right. Also there are our signal pins, okay? So for the PWM outputs, or input as far as the receiver goes, on the right hand side they're all ground, then we have positives of 5 volts, and then we have the signal wires. So let me just quickly undo that a moment on the screen. Now this first connector, so let me just go and change back to, I'm going to use green. Give me a moment. Let's go and find that in the color palette. There we go. So these first 3 pins, so the pins at the top of the board, nearest those 6 little pins on the very top of the board, those first 3 pins are for your S bus in, or CPPM, as depending what receiver you're using. So your signal wire, which is either a white or a yellow wire, needs to go into this pin here. So let me just go backwards. Needs to go on there, and then you have positive in the middle, and then the black wire on the outside of the actual board itself. So that's the wire, that's where you need that male to male connector. So you'll plug that into your receiver. So I'm going to be using an X8R, so I'll put that into the S bus port, and then I'll plug that in, and we'll then put it into this top pin here. Now below there we've got PWM, okay, so in other words servo pin 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 are special. We'll get to those in a moment. So let me just undo that a moment. And which pins do you use for your servos? Now that really does depend on the model which you've been and chosen. So I've got iNav running here in the background. I'm just going to click on the configuration tab. Now, for this series, I am going to be focusing upon flying wings for you. The reason why I'm focusing upon flying wings is because they are the easiest and simplest models to set up with iNav. Now, obviously, if you're using a fixed wing, the PDM where you plug your servos in will change. But how do you know which pins or which pins do you plug which servos into? And the answer is actually staring us in the face. You'll see here on the left-hand side of the screen, for a flying wing, we've got 1 and 2. So PWM outputs 1 and 2. So let's just move this off the screen. There we go. Is PWM outputs 1 and 2. So those 2 there are for your motors. Now, typically on a flying wing, you only have 1 motor at the back. So you would insert your motor or your ESC wire into PWM1. Let's go back to the iNav configurator. Then we've got our left aileron. And note that we're looking at the model from the back of the model. So our left aileron needs to go into number 3, into PWM3, and our right one into PWM4. We can see that by the numbering on the picture. So let's move that out of the way. So as we just mentioned, so we want PWM3. So that one there is going to be our left wing, or our left servo, which is in our aileron. And then PWM4 is going to be for our right aileron. Really simple, isn't it? Really straightforward. Again, this is why I'm suggesting the V1 board, because I'm setting up the iNav with a flying wing, because it makes the wiring so much easier. Literally, you just bash it in the right places and job's a good one. Now, I am going to go off to take a look at a full-blown or maybe a traditional fixed-wing model. So I'm just going to drop that down and choose fixed, or wherever it is, aeroplane. Now can you see that that picture has now been changed? We have 1 and 2, which is for our motors, okay? And of course, if you only got 1 motor, you just stick it into PWM1 back on the board. And then aileron, the left aileron of our model is PWM4, and our right aileron is PWM5. So I'm just going to go back to the picture a moment and draw on there. So so PWM1, that row there, the second row down, because remember the top row which we've got up there is using for S-bus. Let me move that out of the way. So PWM1 is used for your motor, okay? Then 3 is used for, and I'm just checking against the picture here in the background. Again, I'm not cheating. All I'm doing is just looking at the picture. And if you can manage looking at a picture, it's really straightforward. So PWM 3 is for the elevator. Okay, and the reason why I know it's for the elevator is that it's orange there. Okay, it says 3. So that's PWM output number 3. Then PWM out 4, that one there is for our left aileron. Okay, PWM 5, which is that pin there, is for our right aileron. Okay, and again, I'm just looking at the picture. Okay, you just need to know where you need to stuff those servo connectors in. Okay, and then PWM 6, as you can tell by the picture, is that one there, and that's where we put our rudder. Okay, really straightforward. Now, it does obviously depend upon the model which you're going to be using. Like I said, for this series, we are going to be focusing purely upon a flying wing, and of course, I may add some appendix episodes to this series later on, where we look at a full-blown fixed wing model. So I hope so far this is all straightforward, nothing complicated. All we need to do is attach our S-bus to the first row, our motor to the second row, and then and again, this series is focused on applying a flying wing, your left wing, your left elevon on PWM 3, and your right elevon on PWM 4. All nice and straightforward so far. Happy days. Right, let's move on. Let's talk about FPV now. One of the main reasons for this series, which is iNav gives you many different features, and we'll be covering the different flight modes with you. And the thing is about these boards is that they do have an on-screen display built in. Now let's take a quick look at the OSD board, the OSD pin connections. There is only 3 pins which you need to know about, and they're really straightforward. And I've kind of already highlighted them on the screen for you. It's up here on the top of the board, and again, you'll now appreciate why I'm not trying to explain it on this board on the web camera, because that would just be an absolute nightmare. So using the picture on the screen, much easier. Remember, there is the full-blown version of this image as a link in the video description, so you can study it yourself as well. So we've got this section here which says video in from your FPV camera. So the yellow wire which comes out of your FPV camera, you put into the pin which is nearest the outside edge and nearest the square on those little 6 connectors. Okay, nice and straightforward. And of course, the idea of the on-screen display is that it takes the raw video footage in, it then applies the OSD screen on it, so it maybe put like the direction to home or your height or anything else, or maybe the artificial horizon onto that image, and then we then need to send that image, that interpolated, the overlay, that's the right word, the overlay of the OSD, then onto your video transmitter. And you do that by connecting your yellow lead, which then goes onto your video transmitter, onto that pin there. Okay, so again, even if you had them the wrong way round, it wouldn't work. You can't go wrong with those. So the outside pin, the one nearest the edge and nearest the screw hole, that is for our video in. So it goes in there, and then iNav applies the OSD to the screen, overlays the OSD on top, and then it spits out on this pin here. Now, I did mention 3 pins, and the reason for that is very simple. When it comes to your FPV video system, you must ensure that you are using a common ground. So you'll notice my big note here about using a common ground, okay? And the reason why I mention the common grounds is that your ground lead from your FPV camera and also the ground lead from your video transmitter, okay, at some point they do need to go to a ground pin on the flight control board. Now, the obvious 2 pins are the 2 pins which are up here on the screen, those 2 there, okay, which are near the inside of the board, is that you will need a common earth there. And the reason for that is that it will stop or reduce the flickering of the on-screen display. Now, if you've watched a couple of my maidens, which I've done with iNav, you may see some flickering on the screen. to be honest, that is a little bit, it's somewhat to be expected, and it can be dampened down by ensuring that you're using a common ground. In other words, your ground from your FPV camera and your FPV transmitter are all coming back to a central point. So a ground pin anywhere on this board would be fantastic. I'm just pointing those two out because, to be perfectly honest, those are the easiest pins for you to connect to. Now let's take a look at the left hand side of the board, and we will get onto a topic about powering the board, and we do have two options available to us, and I'll be explaining why I will personally not be showing you there's two routes you can go. There's a simpler route and there's a more advanced route, okay? And the more advanced route you need to go really careful with, because I'm going to let you into a little secret. That board I fried, okay, and I don't want that to happen to you, okay. So I'm going to be showing you the simpler way, okay, the way which I prefer. And if you're only flying a flying wing, then you're not going to get anywhere near the current usage there's no way which you're going to be overpowering your board and blowing out your voltage regulator on the bottom. Now that sounds kind of nerdy, but it'll make more sense in a few moments time. So anyway, on the left hand side of the board, and this is where this is why I made this image for you, just to help you, because down here there's only 4 pins which you need to know about. The first two are these 2 pins here. Now I really do need to change the colors so that it stands out a lot better for you. So let me just put that there. So there's that. So it's from the bottom of the board, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows up. Okay, and those are ground pins. Okay, we also need to point out that we have live or 5 volts on these. Okay, and it's that row there. So we have ground and we have 5 volts. Okay, those are the 2 pins which you're going to be using to power your GPS module. Let me see if I've still got. I've just been and popped the screenshot of the plugs for the GPS unit on the V1 board up on your screen, and you will see here 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's the black pin which is in ground, and then 1, 2, 3 pins up on the middle row. I've been and put in the positive, and that's the power lines which go off to our GPS. Now you'll notice that I've got another plug here with a white and a brown wire. Okay, let me move that out of the way. Is that down here, let me go and get the green color back for you as well. There we go, nice green color. Is these bottom 2 pins down here. Okay, so it's the 2 pins at the bottom to the inside of the board. Okay, those are your RX and TX wires which come from your GPS unit, and they plug into the board here. Now the thing to note with TX and RX is that you take your RX wire from your GPS unit and you plug it into your TX pin on your flight controller, and of course then with the TX pin on the GPS you plug that into the RX pin. Now, so basically they need to be switched over so that the board can communicate with your GPS unit. Now I know that sounds a little bit odd, and to be frankly honest, don't worry about if you get the TX and the RX the wrong way round. The reason why I'm saying don't worry about it getting it the wrong way round is because when it comes around to wiring up your GPS, the only 2 dangerous pins are the positive and the negative pins. Okay, you get that the wrong way round and you're going to get magic pixie smoke. Okay, so you go extremely careful with those. However, with the TX and the RX, it doesn't matter, because it will either work or it won't work. And you'll know that it works or it won't work because I'll show you how to set that up in a later episode. Now let's go and talk about that point which I mentioned about powering the flight control board. What you can do, and I'm sure the guys over at iNav are maybe going to freak out about this a little bit, but I would like to make the point, it works perfectly fine, okay, is that there are 2 ways which you can power your flight controller board. The first way is the simpler way, and also the way which I would personally strongly suggest to you that you take with your flight controller board and iNav. And the reason for that is that it is the simplest, and there's very little chance that you can blow anything up on your little board. And that route is, very simply, is that when you plug in your ESC, which has an inbuilt BEC, so I am assuming that your speed controller has a BEC on board, okay, is that when you plug in your speed controller, is that you leave your 5 volts, the red wire, in the middle. Okay, that then means is that you will then get 5 volts. Again, I'm going to choose the get red again. There we go. That then means that you get 5 volts across that rail there, and it also means that you get your 5 volts over here on the left hand side. Okay, because we're only talking about a flying wing here. Flying wings, typically they only have 2 servos, and of course we're talking about a smaller flying wing, even up to like the Falcon, which was a monstrous great big wing, well 1.2 meters, nice big wing. It still only had 2 little 9 or 12 gram servos in it, and you're not going to overpower those servos, and you're not going to overpower the back or the board. Okay, so the risk of a brownout, so a condition where you try and draw too much current from your ESC or from the 5 volt rail from the back, is then causes a brownout. In other words, the board to glitch. Okay, that's the likelihood of that happening is very, very rare. So that's the suggestion which I'm going to give you for powering up your board, is just use the back, the 5 volt rail off your ESC, and you plug that in just as you, like we mentioned, we put that on PWM. Let me choose again, choosing the right color here. Stick with green. There we go. We put our ESC in on that wire there. We have the signal wire just there, 5 volts in the middle, and then ground on this outside rail. So that is the route which I'm going to suggest to you. And the reason why I'm suggesting that to you is because that is the simplest way of setting up and powering up your board. Because when you then go on connect your servos through your flying wing on PWM3, which remember was our left wing, it says 3 on the pretty picture, and PWM4, which is our right wing, okay, your servos will work. The flight control board is powered, and the only caveat to that is that your FPV camera, okay, is that you'll need to supply your own voltage, so either directly from the battery or maybe through a low pass filter, for example, is that you'll need to power the positive wire and your ground wire to your FPV camera and FPV transmitter separately. Okay, so that's what I would suggest. That is the easiest way of wiring it up. Now, the alternative to this route is also the route which I would personally not suggest you do, because it does have some dangers to it. And the reason why I say it has some dangers to it is because if you wire this wrong, you're going to blow up your board, and you're going to end up, unfortunately, with a broken board, which I have, if you do this wrong. Okay, and I did it wrong, and I'm going to share this with you. I could have just hidden this fact, but I want to be open and honest with you, and that's straightforward. I plugged it into the wrong pin. Okay, now I have a fair idea what I'm doing, and I made this mistake, and I don't want you to make the same mistake. So that's why I'm suggesting the other route, because it's much simpler, and there's no chance of you applying full battery voltage to your flight controller and then you blowing up $25 worth of kit, and now I've got a pretty ornament. Okay, I don't want that to happen to you, but I am going to mention the alternative. Okay, and that alternative is what you can do. And again, I need to choose the colors specifically here. So let me get black. Okay, the third row down from the top, okay, that pin there, I'm just going to cover it in black. Okay, you would take the battery lead, okay, or from a connector, take a wire out and put ground onto that pin there, and then VBAT, okay, which I'm going to mark in red, so I'm just choosing red here. There we go. You would put onto that second pin there. That does mean that you will then get your pack voltage appear on the screen display. It also means that you would be powering directly from your battery, which is the big danger point. So if you make a Mac mistake and inadvertently put it on one of the other ones, you need to go very, very careful with that. Okay, this is my point. That's why I'm suggesting the other route. Because if you make a screw up, you're going to fry your board. Okay, because if you're running a 4S battery, 14 point whatever volts, not pretty. Okay, one mistake, fried board. Okay, so anyway, with that said, now if you do choose that route, is that you power up, you're straight from your battery, positive on ground, VBAT on that one. Now do not get mistaken, again, does this board have it? No, it doesn't. Phew. Okay, sorry. Some flight control boards have 2 VBATs in there, okay, and it makes it very confusing. But anyway, my point being is that one there, so ground and then full battery voltage onto the second pin in, and remember it's the 3rd row down from the top. If you do that, on the bottom of the flight control board, there is a voltage regulator. So right next to my fingernail, okay, which I hope that's coming out. So just next to my fingernail, there is a voltage regulator, a little black chip with 3 pins and 1 pin, which appears to be doing nothing. Okay, that's the voltage regulator. If you do power from your flight battery, that then does mean that you will then get 5 volts, and got red chosen. That does mean that you will get 5 volts on that rail there. So if you plug in your ESC onto pin, again, I'm going to leave the color red here because it is a little bit, I class it, the other route's far simpler, but I want to give you a rounded view on how to wire these boards up, is that if you then put your ESC onto PWM1, the 5 volts from your ESC is going to be fighting with the 5 volts in the red regulator, which is on the bottom of the board, and good things won't happen. So the easy way of getting around that is that and again, I don't have an ESC on my desk, but I'm sure you've done this before, or may have seen this done before, is that you unpin, so on your ESC wire, where the plug is, you take the middle pin out, so just use a little craft knife, bend the little lip up, take that out, and then tape it around on the wire itself, so that you only end up with the black wire and the white wire or yellow wire, obviously depending upon your ESC, and there's no extra 5 volts going into the middle of the board. Okay, so let me just summarize what we've just been uncovered here, because I know it's kind of a lot for us to take in, but I do want to make the point, wiring up these boards is absolutely, I'm trying not to swear, I'm going to say child's play, because it's really simple if you follow my original suggestion. And let me go and choose the green color, which we had a few moments ago. There we go. Okay, so first pin's there, S-bus. That's where we take our S-bus or our CPPM from our receiver. That goes into the middle. And remember, it's this inner row. Did that color that wrong? It's this inside row which takes the signal pin. So that's where your yellow wire or your white wire goes on the inside of the board. Okay, so we put our S-bus in there for a flying wing. We then connect up our ESC wire, which does include the 5 volts. That is the route which I suggest for you, onto PWM1. We put our left elevon onto PWM3, our right elevon onto PWM4. No, we did. I did cover the full wing, the full fixed wing model a few moments ago. Those pinouts do change if you're using a full normal wing, which has got elevator, ailerons, and a rudder as well. Let's undo that. So that side's really straightforward. Our FPV system, we put video in onto this first pin, so that's the yellow wire from your FPV camera, and then this second pin down there, that then goes out to your FPV transmitter. Then on the left hand side of the board, we've got ground just there, and then we've got plus 5 volts just there. That's where we give the power to the GPS unit. And the last 2 pins which you need to know about are these bottom 2 just down here, which are RX and TX. Okay, remember, RX and TX, it does not matter which way you put them around. It will either work or it won't, as you will discover in a later episode. So the wiring for the V1 flight controller. I know that I've been talking, I'm just here looking at the flight timer, and it says I've been here chatting for 29 minutes. The wiring is super straightforward. It's as straightforward as you make it. You can do other things with the flight controller board, like we mentioned about powering the board with ground and VBAT, okay, but that does come with some dangers, because if you put the VBAT on the wrong pin, you end up with an absolutely knackered board. Okay, it's a pity I've wasted $20 on that one because I stuffed the pins in the wrong place. I don't want that to happen to you. That's why I'm suggesting that you take the simpler route, which is just to power your board off the BEC which is in your speed controller. And of course, you could also use a separate BEC, maybe on one of the spare pins, maybe on PWM2 on that, because that was spare plug, because I assume your flying wing doesn't have a second motor. You could put ground and 5 volts in there, and then that would work as well. Now, if I've lost you at any point during this episode, don't panic. In the later episodes, we will be wiring this board up together. I wanted to give you this overview to the flight controller board and where you'll be jabbing your little pins and your servos in, okay, so it's not like scary to you. If you have any questions about anything which we've been covered together in this episode, just ask in the comments section underneath this episode. And remember, if you are using a different flight control board, okay, the pinouts are very likely to be different, okay? So this episode is only for the Omnibus F4 V1 flight controller board. So as always, from myself, Matt, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this episode, and I'll see you in the next part of the iNav series. From myself, Matt, cheerios!